I'm Natalia Shepard, 32, and I built my life from the ground up. Steady job, steady hands, and enough grit to carry more than my share. For years, I paid the bills, kept the lights on, and made sure my parents had a roof over their heads. But when my own father forgot to hang up the phone and called me a failure who should have never been born, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been dismissed or betrayed by the very people you sacrificed for? If you have, share your story in the comments. Trust me, you're not the only one. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw the line for your own peace, hit that like button and subscribe. What happened next, you won't believe. I grew up in a house where being useful was the only way to be seen. My dad wasn't cruel, exactly. But he ran our family like a tight operation, no emotion, no room for softness. He came home from work every evening at 6:10 sharp, hung his coat, ate his dinner, and settled into his chair with the remote like clockwork. My mom stayed quiet most of the time. She moved through the house like a background actor, blending in with the furniture. It was my dad who set the tone. His word was final. His mood dictated ours. We were a family of 5, me, my parents, and 2 younger brothers. Both boys were loud, athletic, constantly getting into trouble. My role was different. I was the fixer, the one who filled in the gaps. If something was missing, I found it. If someone forgot something, I remembered. My usefulness started early. By the time I was 10, I was the one keeping track of the grocery list and calling in my mom's prescription refills. At 13, I scheduled my own doctor appointments. At 16, I was reminding my dad of his dental cleanings and submitting my brother's school forms because no one else would. It was never said aloud, but I learned the rules quickly. Stay quiet, stay confident, stay invisible unless you're solving a problem. My dad didn't offer praise. If I did something right, it was expected. If I slipped up, even slightly, he'd sigh, shake his head, and fix it himself. That sigh stuck with me. It was worse than yelling. Like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. After college, I moved back home, not because I wanted to, but because the job market was rough and my parents acted like it was the practical choice. I worked full-time at a regional logistics firm, handling client accounts and vendor negotiations. The pay wasn't great, but I managed. At first, I contributed a little, paid for household groceries, chipped in for gas and utilities. Then a lot. My dad's car broke down and I put it on my credit card. My mom needed dental surgery that insurance didn't cover. I wrote the check. They never asked directly. They just let me handle it. By the time I was 28, I was paying the mortgage. That part happened slowly. First it was, hey, we're a little tight this month. Could you cover it just this once? Then again the next month. Then permanently. Eventually, I set up an automatic payment from my checking account. I told myself I didn't mind. They'd always said the house was the one thing we couldn't lose. It wasn't a mansion, but it was in a nice neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, updated kitchen, a finished basement my dad liked to call his zone. My brothers were both gone by then, one moved out of state, the other in and out of community college, so it was just me and them. Even then, I didn't think of it as sacrifice. I thought of it as stability. I was investing in family. In security. It felt like the right thing to do. I never told anyone outside the family that I was covering the mortgage. It felt like something shameful and noble all at once. Friends would talk about saving for a down payment or buying their first car, and I'd nod along, knowing my money was already spoken for. I justified it by saying I had no kids, no major expenses. What was I going to do with that extra money anyway? Go on vacation? Buy a nicer couch? But the truth is, I was waiting. Not for thanks, exactly. I wasn't that naive. But for acknowledgement. For some small signal that he saw what I was doing. That I mattered beyond just being the problem solver. He never said anything. No thank you. No recognition. If I mentioned the mortgage, he'd change the subject or say something like, well, you live here too, even though I paid rent separately for the basement suite. He referred to it as our house when talking to others. Like he'd built it himself, brick by brick. Like I was just along for the ride. There was one summer I'll never forget. I was 30. The AC broke down in the middle of July, and the repair guy quoted nearly $4,000 for a full replacement. My parents panicked. My dad called it unrealistic. My mom said maybe they could borrow a window unit from a neighbor. I paid for the replacement in full the next morning. When the technician left, my dad just said, "It's good it's fixed before the heat really sets in." That was it. Not even eye contact. I think that's when something started to shift. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet awareness. That I could bend over backwards to hold things together, and it would still never be enough. That usefulness wasn't the same as being valued. But I still stayed. There were always reasons. The house was in my name, and selling it felt messy. My job was remote, so the commute didn't matter. My parents were getting older. My dad had a minor health scare that year, a bout of chest pain that turned out to be indigestion, but still rattled everyone. I told myself I needed to be close, just in case. And then there was the annual retreat. A week-long family tradition upstate, something we'd done every summer since I was a kid. Rental cabins, group meals, bonfires. I was the only one who never missed it. Every year, I booked the lodging, coordinated schedules, paid the deposits. My brothers would show up late or leave early. My parents would act like it was their event, even though I was the one who made it happen. One year, my dad joked in front of everyone, we'd never make it to the lake without her. She's our unpaid travel agent. Everyone laughed. I smiled. But inside, something clenched. I never asked for much in return. Just a clean bed. A little consideration. Maybe a nod of appreciation when I handled everything again, quietly and efficiently. What I didn't realize was that in giving so much, I'd made myself invisible. I'd built the structure they all lived in, and in doing so, they'd stopped seeing me as a person at all. Just the one who handled things. Reliable. Predictable. Background support. And I was okay with that until the moment I wasn't. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just little shifts in tone. The kind of comments that could pass as harmless if you weren't really listening. When my friends came by for dinner one night, my dad asked them, half joking, "So is she still glued to her laptop 24/7? Or did she finally figure out how to have a real life?" Everyone laughed politely. I forced a smile, but inside I went cold. I just wrapped a major account at work that week, something that had taken months to secure. He knew that. I'd told him. But none of that made it into the joke. Mom laughed along with him, the same way she always did when his humor turned sideways. Like correcting him would have been more disruptive than the comment itself. Things started to feel off after my younger brother moved back in. Mark was in his late 20s, newly divorced, underemployed, and constantly figuring things out. My parents welcomed him back like a returning war hero. Mom made his favorite meals. Dad started calling him the man of the house as a joke, even though I was still the one paying the mortgage. I remember coming home from a work trip and finding that Mark had taken over my parking spot in the driveway. No one said anything. It just stayed that way. Mark talked big, plans to launch a podcast, maybe get into real estate, maybe start flipping cars. He slept until noon, left dishes in the sink, borrowed money from Mom that never came back. But when Dad talked about him, it was with a kind of admiration I hadn't heard in years. "He's got that entrepreneurial spirit," he'd say. "Just needs a little momentum." I wanted to laugh. I'd been managing six-figure contracts and handling vendor negotiations for nearly a decade. But no one called that entrepreneurial. They just called it work. At dinner one night, Dad mentioned that Mark was thinking of converting the basement suite into a studio. "You wouldn't mind bunking upstairs for a bit, would you?" he asked, not even looking up from his plate. I blinked. "You mean, move out of the space I pay for?" He waved it off. "It's not permanent. Just until he gets on his feet." I didn't agree to anything. But the fact that he'd asked, so casually, stuck with me. Like I was a guest in my own home. Like the fact that my money kept the lights on wasn't even relevant. It wasn't just the basement. It was everything. Dad started excluding me from family discussions, vacation plans, retirement decisions, even repairs on the house. I'd find out about things after the fact, when the contractor had already been scheduled or the deposit already paid. If I asked about it, he'd say something like, "We didn't want to bother you, you're always so busy." It felt like being erased in slow motion. Like all the things I did were invisible until they became inconvenient. And once they were inconvenient, they were used against me. One afternoon, I overheard him talking to my uncle on speakerphone. I had just walked into the kitchen, and he didn't realize I was behind him. "Yeah, she's still here," he said, chuckling. "Always working, always tense. Can't settle down, but she means well." I didn't say anything. Just walked right back out the way I came. I didn't know what bothered me more, the words or the ease with which he said them. Around that same time, I noticed he talked about my other brother, Jake, like he was some kind of savior. Jake lived 3 hours away, visited maybe twice a year, but somehow managed to occupy more space in my dad's stories than I ever did. "Jake's doing great," he'd say. "Still working that government job, you know. Solid benefits. Smart kid." There was never any mention of the fact that Jake hadn't called during Mom's surgery, or that he hadn't sent a single dollar when they were struggling with property taxes 2 years ago. Meanwhile, I'd maxed out my own credit card to cover the balance. One night, I asked my mom if Dad ever talked about me to their friends. She looked up from her tea and hesitated just long enough to give me the answer. "He says you work a lot," she finally offered. "He says you're self-sufficient." It sounded like a compliment, but it didn't land like one. It landed like a subtle dismissal. Like, self-sufficient was another word for on your own. There was one moment that really stuck. We were out shopping for a new fridge. Ours had been on its last legs for months, and I'd finally decided to replace it. I offered to pay, of course. Dad came along to pick it out. The sales guy looked between us and asked who the appliance was for. Dad jumped in immediately. "It's for my house," he said. "We're upgrading. I want something reliable." He said it like he owned the place. Like he was doing me a favor by letting me tag along. I wanted to correct him, but I didn't. I just paid the bill and let him take the receipt. Later, when we were unloading the packaging from the truck, I asked if he'd mentioned to Mark that I was the one buying the fridge. He just shrugged. Does it matter? And that was the thing. It didn't matter to him. None of it ever did. Not the money. Not the labor. Not the time. I remember sitting alone that night in the basement, thinking about the last time he'd asked me how work was going. I couldn't remember. Weeks? Months? He asked Mark nearly every day, even though Mark didn't have a job. The imbalance wasn't just growing, it was becoming normalized. Mark would roll his eyes if I brought up the mortgage. Yeah, we get it," he'd say. "You're the breadwinner. Congrats." Like it was some punchline. Like I was bragging. It started feeling like they'd all made a quiet agreement. I would keep paying, and in return, they'd keep acting like I didn't exist. At a family dinner, Mark brought up the idea of renovating the upstairs bathroom. He said it like it was his idea. Like he was investing in the house. Dad nodded along, even started looking up tile samples on his phone. When I chimed in, gently, about budgeting for it, my dad cut me off. "We don't need to nickel and dime everything," he said. "Let your brother finish an idea before you shoot it down." I didn't say another word that night. The house felt smaller after that. The air heavier. The silence sharper. They weren't just ignoring me, they were building something around me, without me. And I was starting to wonder if I'd ever actually been part of it at all. It happened on a Tuesday. I'd just gotten off a client call and noticed a payment confirmation email from the utility company. My parents' account had auto-drafted from mine like always, and I wanted to make sure the transfer had gone through cleanly. There had been an issue the previous month, and my dad had acted like it was my fault. So I called. He picked up on the third ring. "Yeah, got it," he said, before I could even say hello. His voice was flat, distracted. "Thanks." Then a pause. "All right." And the line clicked. Or I thought it did. But it didn't. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was hearing. Just some shuffling, a low murmur. Then laughter. His voice again, louder now. "She's nothing. A failure. Should have never been born." I froze. There was a beat of silence, then more laughing, his and someone else's, muffled, male. Probably Mark. They were watching something, maybe a game. The sound of chips rustling. The clink of a bottle. And still my phone screen glowed, call in progress. I stayed completely still. I didn't make a noise. I didn't hang up. I just listened, waiting to be sure I hadn't imagined it. But I hadn't. They kept talking, mostly about nonsense after that, sports, someone from high school they ran into at the gas station, but I didn't hear any of it. The sentence had already lodged in my chest like a piece of glass. She's nothing. A failure. Should have never been born. I ended the call without saying a word. I didn't cry. I didn't call back. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat at my desk, looking at the framed photo of all of us at the lake 2 summers ago. I'd paid for that trip, rented the cabin, booked everyone's rooms, printed maps, packed the cooler, handled the driving. And that was what he thought of me. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes when your reality shifts, when someone says something that forces you to reconsider every memory, every interaction, every choice. I sat in that quiet for a long time. My phone buzzed twice while I was still staring at the wall, once from a coworker asking for a file, and once from Mom, sending a meme about tea flavors. I didn't answer either. That night, I didn't sleep. I went through every room in the house slowly, like I was seeing it for the first time. The fridge I paid for. The water heater I replaced. The washer and dryer I had installed after the old one started leaking. I looked at the foundation I had poured myself into, year after year, and tried to understand how someone could live inside it and still think I was nothing. I thought about confronting him, about walking into the living room and just asking, "Did you mean it?" But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. And I knew how it would go. He'd say it was a joke, that I was overreacting, that I always took things too seriously. Or he'd say he didn't remember, that he didn't mean it, that he was frustrated, that I was too sensitive, that I misunderstood. He'd find a way to make it my fault. He always did. So I didn't say anything. But something changed that night. I stopped answering his questions right away. I stopped offering to fix things before being asked. I still paid the bills, at least for that week, but I did it with a new awareness. I was subsidizing someone who didn't see me as a person. I was maintaining a life that didn't include me. The following Saturday, Mark had some friends over. They played music too loud, tracked mud through the kitchen, left beer cans on the counter. I came upstairs once to grab my charger, and my dad waved from the couch without looking up. "Grab me a beer while you're at it," he asked. I didn't answer. I just walked back downstairs. The next morning, no one had cleaned. The house was a mess. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the empty pizza boxes and crumbs, and realized something I'd never said out loud before. I don't belong here. Not just in this house. In this version of the family. The one where my labor was taken for granted and my existence was tolerated only as long as I stayed quiet. I could handle silence. I could handle being overlooked. But this was something else. This was contempt. And now I had proof. She's nothing. A failure. Should have never been born. The words didn't haunt me exactly. They didn't echo in my head like a movie voiceover. They just sat there. Like a stone. Solid. Immovable. A reference point I couldn't unhear. That Sunday, Mom asked if I wanted to go to brunch. She texted like nothing had happened, like we hadn't crossed some irreversible line. I told her I had work to do. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji. I spent the afternoon cleaning the basement suite. Not tidying, clearing. I went through every drawer, every box. Labeled what I was keeping, what I was donating, what I could toss. I didn't know yet what I was planning. But I knew something was ending. Something had to. I kept thinking about how much of my adult life had revolved around keeping them afloat. How my 20s had disappeared into spreadsheets, bank transfers, doctor's appointments, errands. And how none of it meant anything to them. The next week, I canceled the recurring utility payments. Quietly. I didn't tell them. I wanted to see how long it would take for them to notice. I kept paying the mortgage, bare minimum, no extras. But I pulled back everything else. 4 days later, my dad mentioned offhand that the water had been turned off for 3 hours that morning. "City must be doing something," he said. I just nodded. Didn't correct him. It's amazing how quickly people show you who they are when they think you don't matter. How easily your silence becomes their license. I used to think if I did enough, paid enough, gave enough, I'd eventually earn my place. Now I knew the truth. In their eyes, I'd never had one. I didn't cry. I didn't tell anyone, not right away. But something shifted. Quietly, decisively. Like a switch flipped that couldn't be undone. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was a kind of mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. Like I'd been underwater for so long, I'd forgotten what breathing without pressure felt like. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a box of file folders I hadn't touched in months. I opened my banking app, clicked back through statements. Mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, repair costs. I pulled up receipts from Home Depot, Lowe's, Amazon. The fridge. The HVAC replacement. The bathroom plumbing issue last winter. I started writing it all down. Line by line. No rounding, no estimates. Just numbers. It took me 3 hours. By the end of it, the total was $227,391.06. That was the number. Over the past 7.5 years, I had poured nearly $250,000 into a house that wasn't really mine. Not in the way it should have been. It wasn't just the money. It was the missed things. The near vacation to Lisbon I had canceled at the last minute when the property taxes spiked. The new couch I never bought because Dad wanted a pressure washer. The promotion celebration I skipped because the roof needed patching and no one else could be bothered to call the contractor. It was late, past midnight, and the house was dark. I was alone in the basement suite I'd worked so hard to furnish, surrounded by evidence of a life I'd been holding together for other people. I clicked open a spreadsheet. At the top, I typed what they took. Below that, time, money, credit, energy, space. I didn't know what I was going to do with the list. I just knew I had to see it all in one place. And for what? So he could sit 2 floors above me, feet up on a coffee table I paid for, and call me a mistake. A failure. Someone who should have never been born. I hadn't told anyone. But I needed to talk to someone who'd actually listen. Someone whose only loyalty was to me. So the next day, I called Marissa. We hadn't spoken in a few months, not because anything was wrong, just life. She was the kind of friend you didn't need to explain things to. We met in our early 20s working temp jobs, bonded over a shared hatred of cubicle politics and microwave fish in the break room. She'd moved out of state, but we still checked in a few times a year. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Hey, stranger. I sat in silence for a beat too long. You okay? No, I said. Not really. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I didn't give her every detail, not at first. Just told her I was tired. That something had happened. That I was starting to see things differently. You've been holding that place together since college, she said. You were always the adult in that family. I never understood how you did it. I told her about the call. Not all of it. Just the line. She's nothing. A failure. Should have never been born. There was a long pause. Jesus. Yeah. Did you say anything? No. I just listened. Are you still there? For now. I could hear her trying to calibrate her tone, supportive, but not too aggressive. She knew me well enough to know I didn't respond to emotional lectures. Can I ask something? She said. Sure. If this was a boyfriend who said that to you, what would you do? I didn't answer right away. Because I knew. I would have left. No second chances. No internal rationalizing. No weighing context or intent. I would have walked out and never looked back. But it wasn't a boyfriend. It was my father. And I'd built my entire adult life around keeping him and my mother comfortable. The day after our call, I emailed a real estate agent. I'd met her through a client years ago, kept her card in my drawer under a magnet from a failed winery tour. I didn't tell her I was selling, just asked for a consultation. A few hours later, she wrote back. Happy to help. Just let me know when you're ready to talk numbers. I didn't reply right away, but I kept the email open on my screen for the rest of the day. Upstairs, nothing had changed. Mark was still sleeping until noon. My dad still barked out comments from the couch. Mom still floated through the kitchen, humming while I reviewed contracts from the makeshift office I'd set up in the basement. That Sunday, I went out for a walk around the neighborhood. The air smelled like grass clippings and barbecue smoke. Families in matching t-shirts were loading up minivans for soccer practice. Dogs barked through backyard fences. I used to imagine having a place like this of my own one day. Now all I wanted was distance. Clean, quiet distance. I thought about moving out, packing up, breaking the lease on myself, and disappearing into a new apartment across town. But the house was in my name. The mortgage. The insurance. The title. If I left, they'd stay. And that idea made me angrier than anything else. Because it meant nothing would change. They'd keep living here, comfortably. Keep hosting barbecues, keep pretending they were the ones who built this life. No, I wasn't going to hand it over. I wasn't going to walk away from a house I paid for so the man who called me a failure could live rent-free in more ways than one. Something broke loose in me that week. But it wasn't grief. It was resolve. And for the first time in my life, I stopped asking myself how they would feel about my decisions. Because the truth was, they never asked how I felt about theirs. I called the realtor 2 days later. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't pace around or second-guess myself. I just clicked her number and said, "I'm ready to sell." She didn't ask why. Maybe she could hear it in my voice. Maybe she already knew. We scheduled the walkthrough for the following afternoon. I took off work, said I had a dental appointment. It wasn't a lie. Something was being pulled out of me. The house had always been in my name. My parents never qualified for the loan. Back when I first applied, they said I was too young to take that kind of responsibility. But once I signed the papers, they didn't seem to mind. The arrangement was simple. I owned the house, they lived in it, and I paid for most of it. They called it our home. I never corrected them. The listing went up on a Wednesday. By Sunday night, we had 3 serious offers. One was all cash. I accepted it the next morning. Sale price, $947,000. The closing was set for the end of the month. I didn't tell anyone. Not Mark, not Mom, definitely not Dad. I moved quietly. Canceled the utilities in my name effective the day of closing. Filed the necessary forms. Emailed the insurance company. Booked a U-Haul. Not a full-size truck, just one of the smaller ones. Most of what was in that house wasn't mine. The furniture, the dishes, the decor, they'd accumulated over the years like barnacles. I didn't want any of it. What I took could fit in half the truck. My desk, a couple boxes of files, my laptop, clothes, and a few keepsakes from childhood. The rest I left. Blank walls, empty shelves. I found an apartment in a different state, 6 hours away. Not too far, but far enough that no one would drop by unannounced. I signed the lease online. First and last month's rent. No cosigners. No apologies. Move-in day was 2 days before the buyers were scheduled to take possession. I waited until everything was packed, until I was standing in the driveway with the keys in one hand and the door locked behind me before I turned my phone back on. 32 missed calls. All from my dad. The first voicemail started calm. "Hey, I just saw a car outside. Did you call someone about the gutters?" Then the tone shifted. "You need to call me back. Some woman just came by saying she's the new owner." "Is this a mistake?" The third was louder. "What the hell is going on? Are you out of your mind? You don't sell a family home without telling anyone." Then a pause. "Answer your phone. This isn't funny." I didn't respond. I drove the U-Haul across the state line with the windows down and no music. Just the sound of air and engine. When I got to the new apartment, I unloaded everything by myself. It wasn't hard. I'd spent years lifting everyone else's weight. A couple boxes didn't scare me. The next morning, I woke up without hearing footsteps above me. No TV playing at full volume. No kitchen cabinet slamming. Just silence. It was disorienting and peaceful. I made coffee. Sat on the floor, cross-legged, with the mug in both hands, and just stared out the window. It wasn't a view. Just the back of another building and some trees. But it was mine. By noon, my phone had 42 new messages. Dad had escalated. He texted in bursts. "You had no right. We trusted you. You betrayed this family. Where are we supposed to go? How could you do this to your own parents? After everything we gave you." I ignored all of them until the last one. "You're cruel. This is abandonment. I don't care how angry you are, this is unforgivable." I wrote back one sentence. You don't get to insult the person paying your mortgage and expect to stay. Then I blocked his number. I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. My mom tried next. A softer approach. Sweetheart, this doesn't have to be permanent. We're just confused. Can we talk? She left me 3 voicemails in a row, each one slightly more emotional than the last. In the final one, her voice broke. I know he hurt you, but we're still your parents. I didn't answer, because what they never understood was that it wasn't about one insult. It wasn't just that call. It was the years that came before it. The silence when I needed support. The dismissiveness when I needed recognition. The way they leaned on me endlessly and then turned around and pretended I was invisible. They wanted to act like I was the one who changed. Like I had suddenly snapped and done something irrational. But I hadn't changed. I had just stopped pretending. The sale went through 3 days later. The money hit my account, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt the full weight of ownership and the freedom of letting it go. I hired a financial planner, paid off my debts, moved the rest into savings. Mark called once, from an unknown number, left a voicemail I didn't listen to. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I told myself that over and over, you do not owe anyone an explanation for reclaiming your peace. I kept waiting to feel guilt, to feel regret, but it never came. Only quiet, only space, only the slow, steady rhythm of starting over. Word got around fast. Within a week of closing, my phone lit up with numbers I hadn't seen in years. Aunts, cousins, a second uncle I barely remembered. Suddenly everyone wanted to talk. Not to check in, not to understand, but to scold. You really blindsided them, one cousin wrote. You could have handled it with more compassion, said another. Aunt Teresa left a voicemail full of sighs and pauses. Look, I know your father can be difficult, but this? Selling the house? That's extreme. That was their home. That was my house. Paid for with my job, my stress, my late nights, and missed birthdays and canceled vacations. But nobody asked me what led to the decision. They just assumed something must have gone wrong with me. And then the guilt call started. Mark left a voicemail that started calm and ended in shouting. You've got problems. You need therapy. Who does that to their own family? You really think you're better than everyone just because you make money. I deleted it halfway through. Jake sent a message that was less aggressive, but just as clear in its intent. They're not perfect, but they're still mom and dad. You didn't have to burn the whole thing down. But the part that stuck with me wasn't anything they said, it was what none of them did. No one offered to help. Not a single one. Not Mark, who'd been living rent-free in the house for months. Not Jake, who had a guest room and made twice what I did. Not a single relative offered to take them in or help them figure out their next steps. They just assumed I'd come back. That eventually, I'd cool down, feel bad, reverse the sale, or wire money. It was like they thought I'd gone temporarily rogue, but would return to my role eventually. The helper. The responsible one. The emotional shock absorber. I didn't return any calls. Instead, I signed the lease on a small apartment 2 towns over. 1 bedroom, clean kitchen, no upstairs neighbors. It had hardwood floors and wide windows that faced a park. The first night, I sat on the floor with a frozen dinner and no furniture, and it still felt better than any night I'd spent in that house. The next morning, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and emailed my boss. I'd been up for a promotion for a while, something I hadn't had time to push for between managing bills and keeping my family's chaos in check. But now I had time. Mental space. 3 weeks later, I got it. New title, better salary, better clients. The irony didn't escape me. The moment I stopped giving everything away, more came in. I started going to the gym again. Not obsessively, just enough to feel strong. I bought real groceries. Cooked for myself. I even made friends with a neighbor down the hall, a woman in her early 40s with a loud laugh and 2 cats. We didn't talk about family. We talked about books, movies, recipes. It was enough. Then, one afternoon, I got a text from my cousin Danielle. We weren't close, but she had always been more observant than the rest. Just a heads up, your dad's staying in Kevin Martinez's basement. Saw him at the gas station. Looked rough. Don't think he knew I saw him. I read the message 3 times. Kevin Martinez had been one of my dad's old poker friends. Divorced, lived alone. Basement had no windows, no insulation. The kind of place you stayed when there were no other options. I didn't respond to the message. Later that night, I sat with it. Not the image of him in someone's basement, but the silence surrounding it. There'd been no official update. No call from Mom, no messages from Jake. Nobody sending dramatic texts now. The storm had passed, and the reality had settled in. They were on their own. And for the first time, I wasn't being asked to fix it. I didn't feel proud, but I didn't feel guilty either. I felt done. Like I'd finally stepped off a treadmill I didn't realize I was on. It's strange how quiet your life becomes when you stop performing for people who never clapped. In the months that followed, I kept expecting some grand confrontation. An email. A letter. A knock on the door. Something to pull me back in. It never came. The silence stretched, and in it, I built something steady. My weekends belonged to me again. I hiked. I read. I learned how to make really good sourdough. I didn't check my phone 10 times a day, waiting for a crisis. I didn't carry the weight of everyone else's bad decisions. At work, I became the person people came to for guidance, not because I was a pushover, but because I had boundaries. Real ones. Not just rules I enforced for others. Ones I enforced for myself too. I used to think you needed to forgive people to move on. Now I think sometimes moving on is the only forgiveness you can offer. Letting people live with the consequences of how they treated you. Letting yourself live without constantly justifying why you left. I still don't know where they are now. I hear fragments. A cousin mentions something in passing. An old neighbor says they saw Mom working part-time at the pharmacy. But I don't ask. I don't check. I don't reach. Because when someone shows you how little they value you, it's not your job to teach them how to change. It's your job to decide if you want to stay. I stayed for 32 years. Then I left. And that decision gave me my life back. About 6 months later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name and city written carefully across the front, like he wasn't sure if I'd moved again. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded twice. No greeting. No sign-off. Just one sentence in my father's unmistakable block handwriting. I didn't mean what I said. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the damage. Just that vague, quiet sentence, delivered too late, too softly. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to feel anger or indifference. The truth is, I didn't feel much at all. Not anymore. Maybe because the sentence wasn't for me. Maybe it was for him. A way to say something without having to say the actual thing. I didn't respond. I folded the letter back up, slid it into the envelope, and tucked it in a drawer under some old tax documents. Not out of sentiment. Just out of habit. A reflex to keep records, even the ones that no longer mattered. After that, nothing came for a while. Life moved forward. My lease renewed. My job expanded. I started mentoring a younger colleague, a woman in her 20s trying to navigate the same kind of emotional balancing act I had spent years trapped in. We talked about deadlines and clients, but sometimes we talked about parents too. She didn't know the details of my story, but I think she could sense the undercurrent. There's a weight people carry when they've had to earn respect from those who were supposed to give it freely. Another 6 months passed. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a second letter arrived. Same handwriting. This time, the paper was heavier. The envelope thicker. Inside was a slightly longer note. 2 full sentences. You were right to leave. I was wrong about you. Still no apology. But this one felt different. Not performative. Not defensive. There was no story about the past, no excuse, no but. Just 2 flat declarations that landed harder than anything I expected. I sat with that one for a while. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I wanted to be sure that anything I said came from the version of myself I'd become, not the one who used to need his approval. 2 days later, I sent a postcard. Not a letter. Just a simple, printed card with a photo of a mountain range I'd visited recently. On the back, I wrote, "I hope you're doing better." That's it. 1 sentence. No name. No return address. Just a message. And that's as much rebuilding as there's ever been. There were no follow-ups, no phone calls, no requests for contact. Just space and silence. But a different kind of silence than the one that used to haunt me. This one felt earned. Clean. Like boundaries finally respected, not because they were understood, but because they were enforced. I didn't tell anyone about the letters. Not right away. Eventually, I mentioned it in passing to Marissa, during a call about something else entirely. She didn't ask what the letter said. She just asked, "Did you feel anything?" I told her the truth. Relief, I said. Not because he wrote, but because I didn't need him to. That was new. For most of my life, I'd lived in a constant state of hoping that one day he'd see me, understand me, accept me, that the invisible work I did to keep our family running would finally count for something. But by the time the letters arrived, I'd already stopped needing any of that. I'd built a life that didn't require permission or validation. And maybe that's what made his words land at all. Not as redemption, but as acknowledgement. A quiet, late, incomplete one, but acknowledgement nonetheless. I don't know where he lives now. I don't know what his days look like. Whether he's found another basement to stay in, or if someone else has stepped in to care for him the way I used to. What I do know is that I'm no longer the one holding the weight of that question. And that's enough. Sometimes people think forgiveness means letting someone back in. But for me, forgiveness was something smaller, quieter. It meant not carrying the anger anymore. Not rehearsing comebacks in the shower. Not flinching when his name popped up in conversation. It meant saying, "You no longer have access to my energy, my guilt, or my future." I've made peace with the fact that there won't be some dramatic reconciliation. No heartfelt scene, no tearful apology. That's not who he is. And it's not who I need him to be anymore. The letters didn't rebuild trust. They just acknowledged, in the smallest possible way, that I had been telling the truth all along. That I was not the failure. That I was not the problem. That leaving was not cruelty, it was survival. And in that silence, in that space between what was and what could have been, I found something I never had when I was still trying to be the daughter he wanted, a life that belonged entirely to me. It's been 3 years now. I live in a small 2-bedroom condo with big windows and no shared walls. It's not fancy, but it's mine. Every inch of it reflects choices I made, colors I picked, furniture I bought, shelves I built myself on a rainy weekend when I finally had time to learn how to use a drill properly. I sleep better. Not because life is perfect, but because the noise is gone. Not the literal noise, though that's part of it. But the kind that used to buzz under everything I did. The tension of always being on call. The quiet dread of a missed payment, a guilt trip, a new problem I was expected to solve before anyone else even acknowledged it existed. That's gone. I laugh more. It surprised me at first. How often I'd catch myself smiling over something small, like remembering to water my plants on time or finding the perfect parking spot near the grocery store. I didn't realize how much of my old life had been built around bracing. Bracing for the next demand, the next insult disguised as a joke, the next round of "you work too much" from people who depended on that work to live comfortably. Now, no one's asking me for anything. And I don't offer out of reflex. I still help people, but not to be needed. Not to prove my worth. I help when I choose to, when it's mutual, when it comes from a place of trust instead of obligation. I have boundaries now. Real ones. Not lines I draw in my head and then abandon the second someone says, "But you're family." Actual boundaries that I maintain without apology. It took time to learn that boundaries don't require permission. They require consistency. I don't talk to my dad. Not because I hate him, I don't. I let go of that a long time ago. Hate is heavy. It wants attention. It wants reaction. And I'm not in the business of feeding things that drain me. I hear things through people sometimes. A cousin says he's still in the same city. Lives in a small rental unit now, shares it with a friend from work. Apparently, he's quieter these days. Doesn't say much at family gatherings if he even shows up. Some think it's shame. Others think he just got tired. I don't speculate. It's not mine to interpret anymore. What I know is that I no longer carry the weight of trying to earn his love. I don't rehearse conversations in my head. I don't check my phone hoping for another letter. I don't brace when someone says, "Hey, I ran into your dad." I just nod and move on. The relationship didn't end with a dramatic fight. It ended the moment I realized it wasn't a relationship at all. It was a transaction. One where I kept paying, and he kept acting like I owed him more. Letting that go didn't make me cold. It made me clear. The biggest lesson? Just because someone raised you doesn't mean they're entitled to everything you build. Blood isn't a contract. Childhood isn't a debt. You can honor where you came from without handing over the keys to everything you've created. I used to think love was proven through sacrifice. That the more I gave, the more I proved I was worthy of being chosen, seen, respected. Now I know that love isn't about how much you're willing to lose. It's about how much you're willing to protect, including yourself. I still get messages sometimes. A cousin inviting me to a wedding. An old neighbor asking how I'm doing. Occasionally, someone will ask if I ever plan to reconnect. I always answer the same way: we've both made our choices. And mine brought me peace. That's not bitterness. It's closure. I have a friend now, a real friend, the kind I trust without performance. She came into my life slowly, through a book club I didn't want to join but did anyway. We meet for coffee, swap stories, share the kind of laughter that comes from mutual understanding instead of survival. She knows the broad strokes of my story. Not all the details. Just enough to get why silence, for me, feels like an accomplishment. She once asked me if I'd ever forgive my dad. I said I already had. Because forgiveness, for me, wasn't about him. It was about me not waking up every day with his voice in my head. Not letting his judgment echo in rooms he no longer lived in. It's easy to confuse endurance with strength. I did that for years. Thought being able to take it meant I was brave. But strength isn't what you carry. It's what you put down. What you refuse to pick up again. I don't carry his disappointment anymore. I don't carry the voice that said I was nothing. I carry my own voice now. And she's quiet. Steady. Clear. 3 years ago, I sold a house. But really, I gave myself back a life. And that's the part people don't see when they talk about family, about tradition, about duty. Sometimes walking away isn't about anger. It's about permission. To stop shrinking. To stop bleeding for people who won't even acknowledge the wound. To stop waiting for love to show up in the shape you were taught to expect. Because sometimes, the most honest thing you can do, the most loving, most loyal, most necessary thing is leave. And build something better from scratch. Something yours. Something whole. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had to cut ties with family to protect your peace? Do you believe people deserve a second chance after crossing a line that deep? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story hit close to home, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Your boundaries are valid. Your peace is worth protecting.